So, all of us, I would suppose, believe in the Bible. And it was Matthew chapter 5, verse 28, who said that, "But I say unto you, that whosoever looketh upon a woman to lust after her, has already committed adultery with her in his heart." OMG. "Who comes to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravenous wolves." So much with this. This is what we have in the world right now. What do we mean by sexual harassment? Because that is our topic for this morning. According to an American writer, Michel Palodi, it is the use of explicit or implicit, so whether direct or indirect, sexual overtones, including the unwelcome or inappropriate promise of reward in exchange for sexual favor. Okay? That is why any kind of sexual favor you ask in exchange for something that can be considered sexual harassment in general, but our law is limited. We have the Anti-Sexual Harassment Law of 1995, Republic Act 7877. Well, it was signed on the day of St. Valentine, Valentine's Day. Pinirmahan po ni President Ramos. Yan ang tampo ko sa ating lipunan ngayon. Meron tayong araw ng mga puso. I'm waiting para doon sa araw ng mga utak. Parang wala tayong araw ng mga utak. Araw lang ng puso. And I'm reminded of the wordings of Prophet Jeremiah 17 verse 9. "The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it?" Do not trust your heart. That's the reason why God created the head above the heart, so that the desires of the heart will be checked by our mind. Okay? So sabi dito, it prohibits all forms of sexual harassment in 3 places. And arguably, lahat tayo are moving around these 3 places: workplace, education, or training environment. Why? Because under the law, there must be moral ascendancy by the offender over the victim. So in the absence of moral ascendancy of the offender over the victim, there's no sexual harassment. We can charge the offender under other laws, as already mentioned by Dr. Tai earlier. We'll go into that later on if we have time. So, how is sexual harassment committed in the workplace? When the sexual favor is made as a condition in the hiring or in the employment. Ano po? Before the employee is hired, a sexual favor is being requested. And re-employment. This is true especially if the victim has already suffered from our predicament today, end of contract. Because so many promises have been made by politicians, including the current president, to end endo. But there was a bill passed by Congress addressing the problem. What did the president do in 2019? He vetoed the bill. So it did not become a law. I thought you were promising to end that. Kayo naman, nangako na nga, gusto niyo tumupad pa, wag yung demanding, nangako na eh. Diba? Yan na naman, marami naman nangangako sa atin, kaya mag-ingat to tayo. Ang tawag ko dyan, paasa. No, paasa. Sorry for our Cambodian friend, I hope you can understand our language. Ano po? Pagka may paasa po, merong nagkakasakit. Ang sakit, walang gamot. Ang tawag ko UTI. Hindi po urinary tract infection. Umibig tapos iniwan. Umasa tapos ininjan. Ayan. Yes, I normally would tell my students, mag-ingat kayo sa salitang pag-ibig kasi ang pag-ibig para yung bayad sa jeep. Kung minsan hindi sinusuklian. O kung minsan no, kulang ang sukli. At ang pag-ibig daw ay parang gulong. Minsan nasa ibabaw, minsan nasa ilalim, minsan flat, pero minsan reserba ka lang. Mahirap po yun. That's why yung mga estudyante ko will be taking the bar exam starting tomorrow. I would normally tell them, if you do not know the correct answer in the booklet, isulat nyo na lang magmahal. Sir, bakit magmahal? Kasi kahit kailan, hindi naging mali ang magmahal. Ay. Mapapamahal ka nga lang next time. Yung iba naman daw, nag-inuman, yung mga lasenggo, no? Di maiwasan, sabi nila. Pero ako, hindi ako naglalasing. Isulat nyo na lang red horse. Bakit red horse? Ito ang tama. Okay, so in granting said individual favorable compensation, So nangihingi ka ng increase, and sabi, pakis naman. Oy, something like that. Ano po? Ay sexual harassment to yan. And again, in the workplace, the refusal to grant the sexual favor being requested would result in limiting, segregating, classifying the employee, which in a way would discriminate. Diba? Aapihin mo siya, deprive or diminish the employment opportunities or otherwise adversely affect the said employee. If you do not give in to the sexual demand, you'll be given a difficult day in work. You'll be given a difficult task. You'll be transferred to a more difficult duty. That's still sexual harassment because you did not give in to the desire or to the thing being requested. Now, the above also would result in intimidating, hostile, or offensive environment, resulting to the employee being feeling harassed and wanting to quit, despite the fact that he really or she really does not want to quit. So pinapahirapan po para umigay na lang. That's sexual harassment. So how can sexual harassment be committed in training or education environment? So it is committed against one who is under the supervision of the offender. That is why moral ascendancy is requirement for sexual harassment. But even in the absence of moral ascendancy, let's say they're classmates, A is harassing B sexually, that's not sexual harassment because there's no moral ascendancy. But luckily, there's another law, the Safe Spaces Act, Republic Act 11313. Yung pong bawal bastos kung tawagin, also known as the Safe Spaces Act. So in the absence of moral ascendancy, you can charge the offender under the new law. If we have time, I will go into that. Now, when the sexual favor is made as a condition for the giving of passing grade, granting of honors and scholarship, or the payment of stipend. I'll be the one to pay your tuition, but in exchange, you know what I mean? So that's sexual harassment in education and training environment. A student would say, ako nito maraming gumagawa niyan. Sabi ho nung estudyante, sir, ano pong gagawin ko kasi medyo tagilid yung grade ko. Sabi ni professor, tagilid? Ano gusto mo? Tumihaya? Sexual harassment po yan. Kasi sexual harassment is not only physical. It can be by words, by actions, or even through the use of social media. Under Republic Act 11313, it is called gender-based online sexual harassment. Okay? Yun po. Now, when the sexual advances results in an intimidating, hostile, and offensive environment, just like in the workplace. Now, sexual harassment, according to our Supreme Court, abounds in all 6 societies. A society that tolerates sexual harassment is a sick society. It is reprehensible enough. More so when committed or inflicted by those with moral ascendancy. We have to understand that this decision of the court was made prior to the enactment of the anti-sexual harassment law. But right now, we do not say with moral ascendancy because it is an element of sexual harassment. If there's no moral ascendancy, there's no sexual harassment. In the church, it is the pastor who has moral ascendancy over the parishioners or the congregation. Okay? So it is a valid cause for separation from service. Why? Because later on, I'll be talking about the cases that you can file against the offender. Okay? So according to our Supreme Court, sexual harassment is an imposition of misplaced superiority. Why? The reason why he or she is being harassed because he or she occupies a position lower than the offender. Had it been the reverse, he would have not been harassed by the offender. Right? So it affects her change of sense of judgment. It changes her life. Why? A victim of sexual harassment is not only victimized physically, but psychologically, emotionally. So there are other aspects that we have to consider. Now, is there a need for the offender to demand for actual sexual favor? The answer is no. According to the Supreme Court, again, sorry for mentioning decisions of the court, Because if the parties could not agree, the Supreme Court has the final say. And whatever the Supreme Court would rule on, would decide, according to Article 8 of our Civil Code, they shall form part of the judicial or the legal system of the Philippines. So they have the force and effect of a law. So there is no need for demand. The request, demand, or requirement of a sexual favor need not be articulated in a categorical or oral statement, and instead may already be sufficiently discerned from the offender's acts. So there is no need to ask for, let's say, mag-date tayo. But it could be discerned, it could be detected on the acts of the offender. And in another case, according to the court, it is a case of a professor in the School of Law, somewhere in Cagayan de Oro, a Catholic school. The professor was harassing his students sexually during recitation by asking questions with sexual innuendos. Okay, if I may quote, allow me to quote from this decision. In one recitation, the student was saying, "Sir, please come again." Apparently, she did not understand the question. And then the professor said, "What? You want me to come again? You know how long it will take for me to come and you want me to come again?" Or words to that effect. You can read that case. Ano po? So, the students filed a case for sexual harassment, but because they are afraid of what the professor can do, he's a lawyer, a law school professor, it was filed anonymously. And the Supreme Court took cognizance of it and investigated and decided to suspend the lawyer from the practice of law for 5 years and prevent him from teaching in any other law school in the country for the next 10 years, starting 2019. OMG. Diba? Because sexual harassment is abuse of power. It is not necessary that there was an offer for sex for there to be sexual harassment according to the Supreme Court. As a superior's conduct with sexual underpinnings which offends the victim creates a hostile environment would be enough or would suffice. The essence of sexual harassment is not the violation of the victim's sexuality, but the abuse of power by the offender. As I already told you, the reason why he is harassing a subordinate because he has the power. So it is a misplaced superiority in the previous decision. In other words, what the law aims to punish is the undue exercise of power and authority manifested through sexually charged conduct or filled with sexual undertones. So you might be asking, what are the penalties, if there are, for sexual harassment? The law says any person, because you can charge anyone, whether male or female, for as long as there is moral ascendancy and sexual harassment was committed, you can charge him with sexual harassment, and sad to say, the penalty is just 1 month to 6 months imprisonment. Right? So napakababa po niyan, and that can be under probation. Meaning, if he applies for probation after conviction, he would not be imprisoned at all. He will just report to the probation officer, and that is allowed by law. Or a fine of 10 to 20,000 or both at the discretion of the court, and anyone who has been a victim of sexual harassment can file a case within 3 years. After 3 years, you can no longer file it because that is the so-called prescriptive period under the law. Okay? So kaya, if you're a victim, don't be afraid. You file your case. There have been people in authority who have been convicted by with sexual harassment. Ano po? In the case of a division superintendent of city schools in Davao, he harassed a teacher in his own office. Nagpa-follow up po si teacher of her papers. If I remember correctly, he passed the principalship exam. So she was following up the papers, and she was embraced. She was hindi ho loving embrace eh. And hinalikan. And then she filed the case for sexual harassment criminally. But it was dismissed due to insufficiency of funds. I mean, evidence. But she filed a case for sexual harassment administratively before the Civil Service Commission because the division superintendent is a government employee. So the Civil Service Commission has authority to hear and decide these cases. And he was convicted administratively, found guilty. And the superintendent appealed to the Supreme Court, saying that the criminal case was dismissed, so I have no liability. But he was scolded further by the Supreme Court, saying that as school division superintendent, you are bound by a high standard of work ethics. By succumbing to his moral perversity, he failed to live to such standard, and he provided a justifiable cause for his dismissal from service. And according to our Supreme Court, it's a new case, sexual harassment engenders threefold liability. So if you are a victim of sexual harassment, you can file a case, number one, criminally. Criminal case, so that the accused would be put in prison, will be imposed a fine. Civilly. But this another case, you file it in court for damages. This time, you have to pay filing fee. Kasi yung civil case yan. And if he is employed, the Supreme Court said earlier that it is a ground for dismissal from service. So you can charge him administratively. And you can file all these cases at the same time, arising out of the same incident. Sabi nung iba, hindi ba yan triple jeopardy? Double jeopardy lang nasa Constitution natin. But no. Although they may have arisen from the same incident, they are different kinds of cases, so you can file them at the same time against the same respondent. Okay? And is it really true that only women can be a victim of sexual harassment? No, that's not true. According to the Supreme Court on July 8, 2020, to restate, sexual harassment can happen to anyone and everyone. Our society has often depicted women as being the weaker sex and the only victim of sexual harassment. It is high time that this notion is corrected. It's not only women who are victims of sexual harassment. Even us have been victimized at one point. We just cannot complain because we would again be victimized by the society's perception. That's why we just suffer in silence. Joke lang. Ayan. So even men, according to that decision, can be victims of sexual predators. Okay? So I think we still have time. Let me discuss this Safe Spaces Act. In the absence of moral ascendancy, and you feel you are being harassed sexually, you do not file a case of sexual harassment because it will be dismissed. You file a case for violation of Republic Act 11313. There were acts mentioned by Ma'am Tay earlier, and they constitute violation of Safe Spaces Act. Not necessarily sexual harassment if there is no moral ascendancy coming from the offender. So, cursing, nagmumuraw, catcalling, paano kung tinatawag niya yung pusa niya? Pwede, bawal na ba yun? Wolf whistling, leering, intrusive gazing. Now, how do you prove that? In Filipino, yung pong hinuhubaran daw, kumakatingin para naguhubad. Ano yun? I don't know. That's subjective. But there is misogynistic, transphobic, homophobic, and sexist slurs. That's why the authors of this law were afraid that the President of the Republic may not sign the bill at all. Why? There have been so many instances in the past that he had been committing these acts. Diba? So persistent unwanted comments on your appearance. Uy, ang taba-taba mo na. Nako, violation of Safe Spaces Act po yan. Relentless request for personal details. Pwede bang hingin yung cellphone mo? Ay, wag, mahal ito, number lang. Pero kung ayaw pong ibigay ang number, ay wag kayong magpumilit. Pag ayaw, wag niyong pilitin, masasaktan ka lang. Diba? Okay. So yan po. To lighten the mood. Yan ang paliwanag ng palasyo. But the law does not look at the intention. Huh? Because in criminal law, this is called malum prohibitum. ang malum prohibitum po, intent is not material. For as long as you committed the elements constituting the violation, then you are liable. Okay? There's another one. Ayan o. Di ba? So, you do not take my words for this. You can just read them in online, I should say. Okay? So, use of words, gestures, or actions that ridicule on the basis of sex. Kaya ho yung tatawagin natin, I think budding is no longer a proper term, no? Ano ba tawag sa kalangan mga LGBT? Ayan. Kasi nga, we have to be gender sensitive. Then, persistent telling of sexual jokes. Naku, marami ang magigilty dyan. Use of sexual name, comment, and demands. Any statement that has made an invasion of a person's personal space or threatens the person's sense of personal safety. Yung bang ayaw mo naman siyang katabi, tabi ng tabi sa'yo. Umaalis ka na, nilalapitan ka pa rin. Naku, buti sana kung naging batas na ito, no, may kakasuhan ako eh. And then, what's the penalty? The penalty for first offense, 1,000 pesos fine, kayang-kaya, 12 hours community service with gender sensitivity seminar. If it is repeated, second offense, 6 to 10 days imprisonment and a fine of 3,000. Pero if it is repeated for the third time, arresto minor, that's 11 to 30 days imprisonment and 10,000 pesos fine. Now we have a graver offense under this law, making offensive body gestures at someone, just like what the president is doing sometimes. What? Sorry doon sa mga supporter ng Pangulong katulad ko kasi wala tayong magagawa. Ano ba sabi in the Gospel of St. John, chapter 8, verse 32, you shall know the truth and the truth will make you free. People who are afraid to know the truth will never be free. It's the Bible who said that. Okay? Exposing private parts or flashing of private parts. OMG. Ito pa, public. Alam niyo, ako nagtaka. Grabe ang gumagawa niyan. May psychological problem. There was a time, I think before this pandemic or during 2020, a passenger was complaining because she hailed a Grab, yung Grab driver nag-masturbate sa harapan niya. Oh my God. Diba? Groping and other lewd sexual actions. So nagalito yung mga teachers. Sabi lang, bawal lang magbigay ng assignment, bawal din ang groping. Di ba gino-group namin? Group 1, Group 2, Group 3. Iba yan. Okay? So, of course, the penalties are more serious because this is a more serious offense. No? 10,000 to 10,000 fine and 12 hours community service. And then, for the second offense, there's a now imprisonment, 11 to 30 days pa rin, and 15,000 fine. If it is repeated for the third time, arresto mayor. That's up to 6 months imprisonment and the fine is 20,000 pesos. Okay? Now, for the third degree, for lack of better term, we call it third degree, stalking. Even online stalking is included. And then all those acts that we have mentioned, but now that involves touching or pinching. Di nakapagpigil, nanggigil, kinurot. Yan, brushing against the genitalia, face, arms, and anus talaga. I don't know. Di ba? Oh. So what are the penalties for this offenses? Arresto menor on the first time. For the second time, that's up to 6 months imprisonment now, and the fine is much bigger, 50,000. For the third offense, arresto mayor maximum, meaning 6 months, and 100,000 pesos. The law also prohibits acts that use information communication technology in order to terrorize the victim. Now, if you have been harassed sexually online, there is another law applicable, not this one, but the Anti-Cybercrimes Law. That's Republic Act 10175. Okay? Now, what are the penalties for this? The penalties, prison correctional. Prison correctional is 6 months up to 6 years imprisonment. Medium is up to 10 years. Okay? Now, and a fine of 100,000 to 500,000 pesos or both may be imposed at the discretion of the courts. Now, employers, not to mention schools, ano po, and other persons of authority or influence or moral ascendancy in the workplace shall have the duty to prevent, deter, or punish the performance of gender-based sexual harassment in the workplace. Failure on the part of the employer to implement these programs would mean liability. You can be imposed a fine of 5,000 to 15,000. So you have to show the Department of Labor your compliance. But I think the Department of Labor has not yet come up with this kind of implementing rules. Let us just see sa website nila. Now, if there is another violation, your picture is being taken, you do not charge him under the sexual harassment law. You charge him under the Anti-Photo and Video Voyeurism Act. So we have so many laws to protect us from these kinds of offenses or crimes, yet we just have to be familiar with these laws. Okay? So all of these laws are discussed in the YouTube channel that I have recommended to you. You may go to that. So ito kasi, what are the acts prohibited under the Anti-Photo and Video Voyeurism Act? Ito ay taking a picture or video of a person or group of persons performing sexual act or any other similar activity to capture an image of the private area of the person without consent. So it presupposes that if there is consent, there is no violation. Kasi private acts ninyo yan eh. If there's no consent and you did that, that's the violation. But if there is consent, there's no violation initially. Even if there is consent, it is wrong to copy, reproduce it. Right? It is wrong to sell or distribute. It is offensive to publish it. Right? That's why I would normally tell my students, my audience, that even if you really love that person, do not do something, do not allow him to take pictures or videos of you that you would regret later on. Wala pong forever. Okay? Walang forever. May kondisyon yan. Iiwanan kayo niyan. Diba? At tandaan niyo po ito, kahit sa algebra man, sa tunay na buhay, problema ang X. Yang hirap pong kumain ngayon, mag-dine-in at manood ng sine, kasi lagi niyong katabi yung X. At ang sabi ng lalaki dun sa babae, magaling ka ba sa algebra? Ano, bakit? I'll ask you sana to replace my X without asking why. Sabi naman ng isa, I don't care about your X. I'll never ask why for as long as I have you. Ayan. So ano po ang penalty dito? Imprisonment, 3 to 7 years. Marami yung mga ganyang kaso, no? At ibina-blackmail pa. Pag pinicturean kayo, binidyo kayo, and then in-upload sa internet, you can file 2 criminal cases. Kung may relasyon kayo, unahin nyo na yung BAUSI, Violence Against Women and Their Children. Dahil may picture, in-upload, kasuhan nyo under Republic Act 1995. At ito po, isiniraan kayo sa internet, kasuhan nyo under Republic Act 10175 or the Anti-Cybercrimes Act. Okay? So that we'll have more time on interacting with each other. You can check these books at Rex Bookstore. Yan po ay constitutional law. Then some of my discussions are here in Constitutional Law 2, Bill of Rights particularly. If you are interested with our dispute with China and to determine whether or not the government is doing something, and I know they are not doing something, ayan, you read this public international law. If you are an employee or an employer, you would like to know your rights and obligations, you can check this book, Labor Laws and Social Legislation. That's for private sector employment. Rex Bookstore pa rin ho. You're interested in history, you have struggled for freedom. Because I am a teacher, meron no time to, the law and the teaching profession sa CNE. You want to be a licensed teacher, you take the licensure exam, but please do not take it without reviewing. You can use this reviewer sa National Bookstore. And then, the reviewer for the Civil Service Examination. Pasensya na po, medyo matindi lang ang pangangailangan. Ano? And then, Philosophy of Education sa Rex. Geography, Rex Bookstore, Asian Civilization, Rex Bookstore, and this is the very first book that I published way back 1997. I was just new in the teaching profession. I published this book. Kaya lang, bago na yung curriculum, so di ko na siya update. Rizal is also an important part of our lives. Meron tayo niya sa national and sociology. And my wife is also into writing. Ito ho. Now, Literatures of Asia and Africa. I would normally tell my students, if you want to be a teacher or lawyer, use your mouth to earn a living. If you want to use other people's mouth to earn a living, don't be a lawyer, don't be a teacher. Be a dentist instead. With all due respect to the dentist, ano po. But more important than talking is listening. Take a look at the word heart. You remove letter T, you have the word hear. You remove letter H, you have the word ear. So in the middle of the word heart is the word ear. So what does it imply? Our ears are the gateways to our heart. And if you cut both your ears and you put them together, but please do not do this at home, that's dangerous to your health, you'll form a heart-shaped object. So what does it imply? You can never learn how to love unless you know how to listen. Listening is the starting point of loving. That's the reason why God gave me you, hindi po, gave us 2 ears and only 1 tongue, so that we may listen twice and speak only once. And in the Bible, James has that kind of reminder that our tongue is the most dangerous part of our body. Okay? So, how to be happy in this kind of pandemic? Simple lang po. Prioritize only those who prioritize you. If I may take the wordings of Maya Angelou, total ngayon ay Black History Month sa US, sabi ni Maya Angelou, na siya ay buhay pa, do not make someone a priority if all you are to him is just an option. Huwag niyo pong i-prioritize yung mga tao na hindi kayo ang priority nila. Iwasan niyo po yung mga tao na ang tingin sa inyo ay hagdanan lang. Bakit hagdanan? Napapansin ka lang pag hindi pwede ang elevator. Iwasan niyo rin po yung mga tao na para lang Ferris wheel ang dating. Bakit Ferris wheel? Akala mo pinapasaya ka, yung pala pinapaikot-ikot ka lang. And finally, lumayo po kayo sa mga tao na buwan ang dating sa buhay niyo. Buwan, moon. Bakit? Sasamahan ka niyan sa gabi, pero iiwanan ka rin yan pagdating ng araw. Maraming salamat po at magandang umaga sa ating lahat.